Do you want to facilitate or do you want to participate 100%?
No strong preference. I could do either or both. But if you would like to host, I'm happy to have you do so.
I'll just keep us running. Like I'll just
Yeah,
facilitate the
mostly
topics part.
we've got a couple agenda items to make sure we get through them.
Yeah,
So to
exactly.
do the formals, this is the September 29th, 2020 SIG release subproject release engineering meeting. We are recording. The recording will go to YouTube after the meeting. We ask that everybody adhere to our Kubernetes code of conduct and be good people. Our first agenda item is actually you, Laurie, so hand it right to you.
All right. So just some of you have already seen this document. It's a ways of working agreement. Is there anybody here who has not looked at it yet? All right. Is that everyone? Really? If I gave you a pop quiz and gave toasters as prizes, would you answer the questions? Yeah? Okay. So let's look at the actual document because there are some gaps in it. And we don't have to necessarily resolve all of these issues today, but aware of them. So yeah, I guess I can share my screen. And then I just want to pop up the right. Yeah. Right window. Okay, so as you may or may not know, the actual release engineering documentation is rather skimpy at the moment. And so one of the ideas of this is once we've completed this agreement, we can use it to transfer over to the repo and use it as documentation. So the idea here is that it actually won't be a super long agreement in itself, because that makes it harder to follow and just to digest. So things like the schedule and the role descriptions would be extracted out of the agreement itself. And then the focus of it would then be is how do we work together? Does that make sense? Okay. So one thing that we already do have in the repository documentation is the schedule of recurring work. Does anybody have any questions about this schedule? Okay, so Tim has a couple of questions. As it is in the repo right now, the ad hoc section has some of these topics listed as ad hoc, and Tim is suggesting that perhaps we would actually schedule those, so move them up into a regular cadence. One of the points is about updating Golang versions. He suggests monthly. Does anybody have any objections to that? You do, okay.
So I wasn't maybe necessarily suggesting that it is monthly, but that we need some sort of a cadence or entry criteria to the change.
Okay.
We, on average, kind of get Golang bumps on a monthly basis, but we haven't always consumed all of them. There have been ones where the change was small and it had no bearing on us. So the effort to consume it in the near term, there wasn't a value proposition there. Mm-hmm. But at the same time, it is important to consume them because people will say, oh, I did a security audit and I see your binaries are made with the old version. The new version had a CVE. Maybe we've assessed that to not be a relevant CVE test, but those conversations also have a cost to them and they can happen repeatedly. So we need some way of describing all of that process.
Okay. What do others think here? How might we resolve Tim's concern?
I would just like to add one thing here. Hello. Sorry,
Hi.
hello. So with the update Golang versions monthly in Kubernetes, what we can do is like not monthly. Whenever a new release comes, we can like have some time period. Like it could be a month that we adapt that Golang release in our Kubernetes repo, and use GoFix tools to in the CI or some automated way to fix all of those or improve those updates and stuff. I hope I was clear.
One of the benefits of having a monthly cadence could be that we do that some period of time before we make our scheduled monthly patch releases of the Kubernetes release branches. That way, when we get to making the patch release in the normal case, we would have the latest one at that point. But that also assumes in some sort of backing process of getting the thing in, getting it tested and validated in the right sequence.
Thank you, Tim.
So how could we resolve this? Like, what is how long would we be able to go before we would incur risk that would create problems? Maybe look at it like that. Is that why monthly would be, is your first guess? Is that when you think that we start to incur some risk?
Certainly, if there's a newer version than what we have built and released with, that opens the potential for people to question our choice. And those conversations then are one of the things that we see consuming time. But there's also a communication aspect there. I'm not sure if or how we would make it visible when we, in conjunction with the Kubernetes security folks, have decided this one's not urgent. It's gone through a triage process, but we've decided we're either not picking it up right now because there's other issues, or we're going to pick it up next month, something like that. Those types of communications we can send out to KDev, but whether we actually get significant readership, it's hard to say. I think we still end up with the conversations. Maybe we catch some of them. So the risk part's hard to address because I think part of what we're dealing with here is CVEs. I don't know if maybe every other or once a quarter we have a Golang CVE that comes through on average lately. So that adds a pressure to it, at least from a perception perspective, even when they're triaged to not irrelevant.
Mm-hmm. So what would be the longest span of time that we could actually go to bed at night feeling comfortable with the decision?
If there's no critical CVEs that impact us, I think we could potentially go 6 months. We've had branches where we didn't adopt the newest release, like the transition for the project as a whole to 1.13 was slow, but we had reasons there and we were communicating it for in that case.
Could we have a policy that we'd have CVEs dealt with separately, but then if there are no CVEs, then we would have a quarter?
I would say let's look at a quarter instead. Yeah.
Okay. So if anybody has any objections to that, you think about it later on, please just add them to the doc, but I think it's about getting to what we can live with.
I was wondering, I saw you, Stephen, when you did the update, and I think it was much harder to do when the minor bump that just a patch release. I mean, it was harder to do to 1.15, right? I don't know if that's more urgent or it is the same to do a regular bump.
Yeah, the minor bump, it depends. The minor bump can be much harder. I think what we run into, or what we will run into every time, is that we have to consider the baselese that's involved with the bump as well. So every every update to Go requires a similar update to the Bazel rules _ Go. So basically, every time a new version of Go comes out, Bazel updates rules _ Go. We have to pick it up in repo infra, and then use the repo infra bump. Basically, bump it in repo infra, tag repo infra, and then come back and use that in Kubernetes. So it's really, I mean, that is going to happen every time. I know that Jay Conrad is working on helping that not be a thing anymore. So that rules Go can arbitrarily pick up any value of the SDK without having to actually bump the version. I know that is a little ways out. But yeah, there's kind of a intricate dance that's required every time we do this. The minor versions are a lot more likely to include things in the release notes that we have to consider that are potentially code changes to Kubernetes in addition to just the bump process. So I think it's going to depend, release to release. But yes, the minor ones can be a lot tougher than the patch release.
So I think if I just have to go through this doc faster with more prompts to sidebar some of the conversations, or else it will take up the whole meeting. And I know we have a bunch of other topics to get through. So why don't we just do that? I will flag anything that's highlighted, ask you if we can resolve that here. And if we cannot, then I'm going to ask for an owner to help us resolve it for the next time offline over Slack, for example, in the release management channel. Does that work for everybody? Yeah, because we want to get to other topics. So updating the core Kubernetes base images. Tim's pitching weekly as an idea. Does that sound good, or do we need to resolve this through a discussion? Does anybody have objections to a weekly update here?
I think we can do longer tail,
Okay.
but let me think about it a little.
Okay.
I would like to ask one more thing here. Like we are gonna compose those Kubernetes base images whenever the new tools are. What if we depend on the release whenever we have a new release, if for example of etcd, etcd, and what we do is like then create a basic case base image. Thoughts?
So sorry, I'm not sure I understand the question.
Yeah, I think you faded out.
I asked that what if rather than we make Kubernetes base images weekly, what we can do is whenever there's a etcd image released, we can like create that at that time. That this just a random idea. Like
So
well,
there are a variety of base images that we depend on that are not hinged on the etcd version. So it's going to kind of depend on what comes out when. Debian base images are dependent on CV content, various other factors. Might be dependency changes within the base image that we might want to pick up. So it's not going to just be etcd. It's going to be a lot of different things, and we can't faithfully map all of those right this second. So let's.
that makes sense. Thank you, Tim.
So Stephen, would you like to resolve this? Would you like to own the resolution of this by next time?
Everything image related you can give to me because I've been working on them.
Okay, yeah, that makes sense. All right. And then moving down to the agreement section around team roles. So if you have this one of these particular roles, please fill in anything that you believe is missing. the idea here is to give a fairly good grasp for others of what your role is without, breaking it down into endless granularity. Marco, I don't know if Marco is here. He was driving the associate's role definition. I guess he's not here. So since that was a sub initiative that Marco was driving, if you're an associate, would be great for you to add whatever you think is missing here, because there was the desire for more definition for that role specifically. So here is your chance to craft that role description for your peers as well. Moving on down to metrics we care about. So here are a number of suggestions. Regressions, introduce in patch releases, time spent cherry picking, time spent cutting a release. Are we good with those? Because highlight means question. If we're good with those metrics as starters, we can unhighlight them and just call them metrics we care about. Yeah, I guess we're fine with these.
I think this is good to start. Yeah.
Okay, super. Knowledge exchange goals. This is also part of Marco's efforts. The idea here is what knowledge in form of documentation, instruction, mentoring, whatever, do you all need to be able to do work fairly autonomously? So there's dependencies, and then there's documentation needs. There's nothing here yet, and we know that there's a lot of, well, at least several of both. Does anybody here have time to help Marco sort that list? Based on your own experience, like when you were blocked by getting something done and you needed something, what was that thing? That's the kind of information that we're looking for.
I'm still learning all the things, but I'm happy to take notes and pass that all the way to Marco.
I think that's great because you're coming at this with really fresh eyes. So your perspective is quite valuable here.
I'm a newcomer too, and I can't like just actually do that, but I can most probably provide some notes and on that if needed.
Okay. So how about the two of you work together there, and you could post in the release management Slack channel as you know that you are looking for more input, and if you add your own to this doc and you want some feedback, like try to engage the others who might also have their own ideas.
So
Thank you.
I have a strong preference here for release manager associates to be working on the knowledge exchange goals. I think this is an extension of the work that Marco is doing.
Yeah.
And they're the ones that are going to require the knowledge exchange first.
Sure. But maybe in terms of just, maybe we pair them up with Eddie and Nasser to work with the associates?
Absolutely, that's fine. Just from an RMA perspective, the associates should be driving this.
Yeah, that's a good idea. And then here, so I'll just change my comment here.
This is Marky. I can help here if that helps.
That would be very helpful. This is a huge need. And the sooner we get this done, the better we understand our own landscape for how we can empower associates. So that'd be great. Thank you. All right, moving on down to norms and guidelines. So this is basically the gist of the agreement. Making decisions. Do we think that this is sufficient for us to make decisions with enough transparency and clarity? And y'all said you read this before, so I'm assuming you know what's in this doc. We don't have anything regarding processes here. We have mainly pull requests.
Yeah, I would say that a pull request seems close to final, and that maybe a discussion in the meeting here, which doesn't seem to be mentioned, should be one of the first things that we potentially do. Especially if the user or the potential submitter does not have all the context that they need to make that change.
I didn't catch the first part of what you said. Can you repeat it, please? It was, I don't know what happened, Stephen. It was like some sort of weird sound thing on my end, at least. So I want to make sure I get it.
How about now?
You said something was missing.
Yeah, so I think what's missing here is discussing in this meeting.
Oh, that comes down below in meetings, organizing and running meetings. But you want decisions that are presented on the spot and how we would handle a decision taken in a meeting specifically, right?
So you said I think that section says making decisions. So
Yep.
So yeah, discussing it at the meeting should be one of the ways that we make decisions, not just PRs. That's all I'm pointing out.
Oh, okay. So yeah, then decision making in the meeting overlaps with priorities and process changes. Yeah, okay. So, and I think then just HR decisions, those might not be meeting friendly, you know, we might not bring those to meetings. So how would we, should we address decision making right now in this document about how, like, for example, promoting someone or how they would become an associate? Maybe that's already documented elsewhere and we would just pull that in as links.
It is not.
It's not,
The
okay.
process has been, I guess, semi-secretive, hand-wavy up until now. The becoming an associate is not necessarily easy, and the process has not been documented because we are minimizing the pool of associates that come in. So what it has been to date, and we can document this and we should document this, what it has been to date is you have been a member of the release team for some time, and you've shown aptitude and interest in potentially working on the release management tools. The people who have come in to the associates have been release team members and maybe have led a role for multiple cycles. So that's the, I mean, the huge bar here is that with that access or being on that path, the expectation is that you would eventually be one of the sub 15 right now people or so that have access to cut Kubernetes. So it's not a role we bring people into lightly.
Right, exactly. Okay, but just in terms of crafting this document, we don't have anything written out about that at the moment.
No, not currently.
All right, okay. So maybe we just work with the basics for now until that gets done sometime.
Yep, sure.
All right. Then just keeping each other informed of changes to decisions, because sometimes a decision might get made and then gets reworked.
Yeah,
have these options.
Yeah, I think that again, discussion in the PR, is part of it, but again, it's also talking in this meeting, right, about change decisions. And I think that given a large enough change in scope or a decision that has high impact to multiple people, then we start moving up the net of which groups do we contact, right? Is it release managers? Is it SIG release leads? Is it the release team as well? Is it K SIG release? Is it K dev? Will depend on the situation, but there are bands of concern, right? That are local. That some are local, some are multiple sub-project impacting for SIG release. Some are all of SIG release, and some are multiple teams outside of SIG release, like all within KDEV, right?
Yeah, so should we have like something like a RACI matrix for our own stakeholders?
Yes, absolutely. Okay. Love RACI.
Who would like to help pull that together? And if you don't know what this RACI matrix is, it's basically what we're describing. If you've not heard this acronym before, it's just your concentric circles of folks that need to be informed of something based on their relation to the issue. Would somebody like to help solidify this decision-making component of our work?
I've never done that with this RACI matrix. I'm just Googling it, but I would be curious to be involved to learn that process.
Okay.
Yeah. So I was going to say this should definitely go to the chairs, and the technical lead should be working on this. So Tim, sounds like your point.
Yeah. So chairs and TLs. All right. So I'll reach out to you and we'll do that. Availability. Unless does anybody have any questions about making decisions? Yeah.
I want to make sure that we bias towards doing that in an asynchronous mechanism. I think it's really important that we do have synchronous conversations. Meetings can be a really good way to do high bandwidth decision making and discussions ahead of that. But we also know that we have a strong request from people to be more time zone friendly and inclusive around the planet, and synchronous shared time on the calendar is really hard.
For sure. I just wanted to make sure that meetings were mentioned as a decision making process, because PRs are not really the only ways we make decisions.
Yeah.
I would lean towards issues before PRs, actually, right?
Yeah. Yeah, not everything can be handled in a GitHub issue. So, all right, availability. So this has basically come down to the working on weekends and after hours. There's an effort now on the release team as of yesterday to clarify this there with 2 or 3 sentences of documentation, tweaking if needed in existing docs. How does this group want to handle working on weekends and expectations of doing that? Is there a need for it? Sounded like there was.
To me, it's not like a bad thing to work on the weekend because it's when you can expect the most from me. So.
I think this is more about just how if people feel pressure that they'd have to put in weekends and after hours. So our idea was that, just basically like we respect your lives, but if you commit to doing something and you can't, tell us.
I think it's mainly based also on kind of agreements. If you have some, I don't know, release process going on, that you just agree up front, like, is everyone available and fine at this point in time? Because I mean, it will be every time someone's evening or morning or night or part of the weekend or whatsoever. So I think the key is just to, I don't know, if I'm going to cut a Kubernetes, and that I announce it with enough time upfront to ensure that everyone is on board, and people who joined new, like me, can also find time to shadow this whole process and learn from it.
Okay, do we have to take an action here?
sorry, I'm reading through. So first off, as a leady cherry person, know that you are not required to work on the weekends.
Mhm.
You should not work on the weekends if you
Yeah.
do not want to, right? There are rare events, and they are exceedingly rare now, that there may be something that pops up, right? And usually that will be release related. But I think that discussions from the 117, 116 group, and I'm certainly guilty of working on the weekends and working weird hours. Some of that is to connect with people on different time zones, and some of that is just when inspiration sparks. But yeah, this actually is one of the reasons that we don't cut releases on Mondays anymore, right? To make sure that no one's trying to stage anything over the weekend, and the various people are not being informed or expected to watch their email during or Slack during the weekend. The one way to handle some of this, I think that if you are working nights or weekends, or what would be someone else's day or something, please feel free to open issues, PRs, tag the people that you need to tag. Just make sure you have no expectation of getting a response until their working hours, right? And I think that, as part of this, what would be good, it was something that was kind of on the mental list, but we should document, is what the release manager's working hours are within the release manager's MD, right? So if you're maybe looking for someone at a certain time and you can't find them, then you kind of know that you can, like, oh, release manager sheet, they're not, they're not working right now, right? So don't bug them, right? But yeah, again, do not work on the weekends. Do not, like, there's nothing that we will assign you that you absolutely have to work on the weekends for. Please do not do it. If you're having trouble with any of this and you want to chat offline, feel free to reach out to us, but do not work on the weekends.
I'm going to pause here now because we need time for the other topics, but I'll put this on the next meeting's agenda, so we can finish it. Yeah.
Thank you, Lori, for taking us through that.
Thank you for being taken.
Help, I've been taken.
I follow the speed limit, so it's a safe ride.
Oh, so we went off onto your topic there, Lori, on the agenda, but we hadn't exactly clarified who was going to host the meeting. So do you want to carry on?
Yeah, I can continue doing that. Yeah, let me just get back to, so I think the next topic was from Sasha, right?
No, from Adolfo.
Oh, from Adolfo, sorry.
Yeah, that was for me. So I've been working on a Create subcommand to push objects to the remote repo. And I just had some doubts about the way it's going to be invoked. So I was looking at the values that the current Anago bash script uses. And I was looking at the possible values that could go into the subcommand. So I did, let me find my PR. I did a PR showing the possible, I just dropped it in the chat, using the possible command line interface to the subcommand. And I just wanted to see, because I'm kind of, that part of the release process, it's a bit nebulous to me. I understand what the script does, but I don't know how it's going to be called. And I just wanted to check before moving forward if these command line options are right, or I should change some of them.
So pushing the Git objects produces no output for Enago. Is that correct?
It does, no output, it just works failure or not.
Yeah. So we could probably, I mean, there are a lot of.
So I saw the generate release version, which is, it defines most of the environment variables that Anago uses. And I saw that there are several release keys and the branch, for example, a question I had is, it pushes a branch and also a branch and a master branch. So I don't know if I have to read that from an existing branch to determine it, or just read it from someplace else, or perhaps it needs a little bit of more in-depth review from someone to answer that.
It depends on the type of release that's happening at any one time. So for if we look at the official releases first, right? An official release will cut an official release as well as the next RC on that branch, right? For RCs will only cut RCs, right? Unless you are requesting an RC for a branch that does not exist, right? Then the RC will cut the branch as well as produce the RC, right? The RC type for Krell, right? The alphas and betas are also single releases. So requesting an alpha will just produce an alpha. Requesting a beta will only produce a beta. The only special behavior happens during the official releases and the RC types, right? So by the time Anago hits this push get objects, it's kind of like in this bubble. It's encapsulated to that specific key. So if I'm saying, if the release that I'm doing has a special condition, like cut a branch or cut an additional release, you'll be kind of walking through the workflow for a single key.
Okay.
Right. So it essentially, it doesn't need to pass you don't need to pass it a set of release ordered keys. You just need to pass it whatever key that it's working on at the time.
Okay, and
if that makes sense.
Yeah, and the logic for that should be inside the subcommand, or
it should be in an Anago subcommand. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I have to capture that into an algorithm in there, or should it just do as instructed from outside?
I believe, yeah, you should be able to just do a push essentially.
Yeah, but for example, I can just take a release version and key, for example, 119 RC0, and I can try to do an algorithm to deduct all the things that have to be pushed from that, or should I just take everything, every tag and every branch from the command line options?
Yeah, you'll be taking that. That's essentially what you'll be doing. So like once the first thing that happens is we generate the set of release versions, right? Or one of the first things that happen are we generate the set of release versions. Once you're in one of those flows, it's only using that key, right? Okay. So by the time you get to the push get objects step, it's only considering the bits for that key, right? Then Anago is also looking at, okay, well, I've done this one. I had multiple keys in my list, right? So I'm going to hit the next one, right? And once it goes through to the next one, then it sees, oh, I also have to push objects for that one too. Right?
Okay, so I should expect my subcommand to be called multiple times for each of them.
Yeah.
Okay, I got it. And also, if anyone has suggestions on the type of, let's say, recoverable errors that we may hit when pushing the subcommands, like network timeouts and so on, I still have to investigate what Git reports us and how it reports back the errors to see which ones can be retried But if anyone has suggestions on that, would be greatly appreciated.
On the prior topic, still, I wanted to throw one thing in. I think it's important that this is a good question you asked, because it's important that we standardize the answer. In Anago, it was kind of implicit. There was a set of environment variables that were global. Everything had access to them. As we decompose things, we need some semblance of shared state and a mechanism for making sure that we're aligned on that. Because if we don't, every subcommand ends up with something for a parser, taking a version string and pulling out the parts, like you were asking, like, do I have to do that? We don't want to do that in multiple places. Even if it's a library that where there's shared code to do that, it's going to make our runtime potentially slower if we're, or it's just like from a performance perspective, if we've done it once, it would be nice to persist that outcome. So the stages of things are have concrete inputs and outputs as opposed to being recalculated all along.
Right. Okay.
So yeah, Sasha says no shared mutable state anymore. We need shared state, but we don't want the state mutating across the pipeline. Any portion of the pipeline should be a concrete, repeatable thing for the same inputs.
Yeah. Agreed there. We should also note that since this is a Krell Anago subcommand, right? Like eventually the idea is that this would go away, right? Or parts of this would go away.
Okay. Okay.
In a decomposed flow, this is take some inputs and affect a mutation on GitHub.
Yeah, I would say that the bulk of the logic you'll want to be in the package as opposed to in the command state, right? That way we can manipulate and reuse as we need to as Anago starts to fall off the face of the earth.
And then I diverged backwards. Your question was on failure scenarios. The main one I'm thinking of is, it's been relatively common, although perhaps more so on the pull side than the push, but we have random failures that are inexplainable. We try to talk to GitHub and we don't. So anything that goes out across the network is something where we need to expect failure and then have a strategy for recovery. We've seen two types of things there. We talked to GitHub and we got an error back, and we talked to GitHub and we got no error back. In each of those scenarios, we have two outcomes that we've observed. A change was affected on GitHub, a change was not affected on GitHub. Those four variations are really confusing. You get a success indication, but nothing happened. You get a failure indication, but something happened. And so figuring out how much of what you did is tricky. The next things that you retry may fail because the prior thing succeeded and GitHub's not letting you, for example, add a duplicate tag. So the conditional logic around the calls is going to be complicated on the error handling, I suspect.
Okay, I'll do some tests and see what I can reproduce in an artificial way, and we can start investigating from that. What do you think?
I think if you're mocking it, that would be the strategy. For anything that you do, allow failure and success with persisted or not persisted change that causes future things to fail or succeed. Like it's quite a forking. And there's no way to do that without mocking it. Like these have been maybe 1 out of 10, 1 out of 20 releases, we see some weird thing.
Yeah, so I think, two of the things to try would for sure be that the happy path, the failures in network connectivity. So watching and capturing those errors. Also failures in authentication against GitHub, right? We have those pretty rarely, but they're usually due to some change in Anago or some change in the libraries that that interpret the that interpret our GitHub token, right? So watch for at the baseline those two things, because those are fairly easy to map via status code, and then everything else, and then the kooky mix of all of the things that Tim said. I would say that plan for one of those failures, but essentially have the retry be, I received no state whatsoever, or I have no idea what's going on. I need to do a few things again to regather that state, right? So whether it's pulling the list of tags for something, right, or pushing, or understanding if a branch exists or not, right, making sure that we go back through that flow before trying to push again.
All right. Okay. All right. That was it. No, thank you.
Can we move on to the next topic? So we have 10 minutes, 2 topics.
Yeah, I can just speed up a bit, but can you just give me presenter rights, please? Ah. Oh, the host disabled screen sharing. Ah, yeah. All right. I would like to give you an update about Krell push. The main target was to move this push build script into a Golang based variant. And usually this script is not used in our repository, so it's not used for cutting releases or something like this, but it's used in our CI. So in test infra, it's still heavily used. And we have some bits down here. For example, we have this locally staged release artifacts function, which is kind of huge. And the first thing I had to do in the past week was to move over all those bash code into Golang-based code. And this has been done and it should work, but now I was going to integrate it somehow into test infra. And I created a dedicated issue for that. So all in all, we have 3 types of usage of this script in test infra. So if we look, so now here we are in test infra, and if we look at push builds, then we can see that we have a deprecated build scenario, which is kind of heavily used. It's used in our own jobs, for example. Then we have, okay, this is the configuration, but we have also kubetest. And my first plan was now to integrate it into kubetest, because kubetest is somehow the standard tool used in CI. But the issue is now that we still use Bazel in test infra, and we can't use k-release, or we can't natively use k-release in test infra because the dependencies are really, really diverging. And it would cause a massive update of their dependencies, and this would probably, I tried it out over multiple hours and it still does not work. So then I spoke with some folks from Test Infra, and now there's a new tool called kubetest 2. And my plan was now to integrate it into kubetest 2, and it looks like this, that we don't have to call out to push build anymore. We can just use k-release as Go module, and then we just have to create our push build, pass down the options we want to provide there, and run push. So, and that's it. And that was my main intention of the past refactorings on the whole push logic. And this can work, but I showed you that we also have something like this locally staged release artifacts, which is also used in Enago, for example, but in a different way. For example, in Enago, we push also our container images as release tarballs to the GCS storage. This is something which is not done by push build. So there is a slight difference between the behavior of both. And my next plan is to build something like a Krell Enago push subcommand. And this also reuses the source code we've already been written, and then runs Krell Enago push and passes down the version and the build directory. And later on, I can also move over those bits, for example, pushing the release artifacts and creating the Docker pushing the Docker artifacts as well. This will be later on migrated up to this subcommand as well. And it looks like this, that we don't have to do much. We just have to run new push build. We pass down the right options, and then we run stage local artifacts. And that's my plan. And I hope it works. I'm testing, this failed, funny enough. I'm testing via the Google Cloud Platform, the integration, and adapt the actual paths. But I'm pretty optimistic that we can reuse the source code in K-release very soon. But we still have issues in migrating over push build or getting rid of the push build sh script and all dependent bash implementations. So one other idea could be that we move over the bash parts to test infra, but I'm not sure if they are happy about this idea.
What could go wrong?
So awesome work. Really awesome work. I know that Dan kicked this off. You picked it up and ran with it. So thanks to both of you for doing that. This is one of the more interesting scripts that we have in our repo, because it touches so many things, and it's kind of like obfuscated the way that it touches those things. So now that you've gone through all of the winding paths, I think the test infra one is the hardest to solve. I know there was a conversation happening even on the Cube Test 2 issue or PR earlier today. And that actually dovetails into some of the work that Dolpho is doing. So the discussion was about kubectl util editor, I think kubectl package util editor or something, and that's one of the packages that we're using for the new release notes editor flow, right, or editing flow. So one of the concerns with integrating this with Cube Test 2 was that now we're starting to pull in API machinery and usages of staging repositories, right, that are in, or staging repositories are repos within Kubernetes under the staging directory that essentially that eventually get published out to separate repositories, right? When you start pulling in anything that is in Kubernetes, you are potentially in like about to be in pain. Direct Kubernetes imports are forbidden. You should not do direct Kubernetes imports. kubectl, less bad because it's a staging repository, but ideally we pull in nothing from Kubernetes. So one of the questions there was, could we potentially, or could SIG-CLI potentially pull the util editor out into its own bits, right? That would solve. So we have two options if we want to minimize the imports for K release, to make Cube Test happy with integrating the CREL push, would be one, talk to SIG-CLI about getting the editor moved somewhere else, right? That's, there's an overall want to take kubectl out of tree, right? I don't know when that's planned for currently, but we should talk to them about that overall, so see how we can help there. But bringing the editor out into a utility that can be used by multiple people, or maybe the entire util package, I'm not sure, right? That's a discussion for SIG-CLI, but doing that would minimize the imports that we have from Kubernetes, and put us in a happier path for integrating with Cube Test 2. Second bit is to just, second option is just to not use util editor, right? And that is more owning our own destiny. If we can find a replacement for util editor, that is maybe the quickest path. But yeah, we can potentially go both routes, Adolfo.
Yeah, what I could do is just strip it out and have our own like fork copy, and because it's not that big a big. I actually talked to Sasha because I was concerned that using that it was pulling a lot of crap into our tooling. So, but I could definitely do like a fork or maybe find an alternative and use that. It's not a big of a deal.
Yeah, so let's the easy win, especially if are people already using the editing flow?
Not yet. Actually, they're scheduled to do their first session sometime this week, and I was invited to it. So
Okay.
they can wait one more week. It's all right.
Well, I would say the least breaky way to do this would be to fork it and call it a day, right? And then we can look at potential other options from there. But I think the two big imports we want to be concerned with are Kates.io, kubectl, as well as I believe we pulled an API machinery. I'm not sure that was you specifically, Adolfo, but we should look at a little go mod y of API machinery too, and make sure that we're pulling in as little of the staging repositories as possible.
We're
Just
out
a
of
quick-
time.
Sorry, I just want to say we're on track for 120 to separate in kubectl to staging. So hopefully that goes through.
And yeah, the final bit is that there is a new project board for release engineering. Created that yesterday because we don't have one for the K-SIGs projects that we have. This is not well prioritized. It's really just toss everything on the board. I think we can go through a prioritization session for the stuff in a future meeting. And I'm happy to have anyone who's interested in some of these projects to help run that.
Okay. Should we call it a day? All right. Calling it a day. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks.
Bye-bye.